as with most Jews, both of my grandfathers who lived in the area between Romania, Moldavia, and Russia, by the time they were in their young teens, it was Russia. And the Tsar would draft Jews at about age 13 and put them in the front lines of the army. So I think that's the main reason that the Jews left Russia, beginning at that time. You ask anybody my age, roughly, and that'll be the story if they're Jewish.
You say at that time, so what are we talking about?
So we're talking around the early 1900s, maybe 1905 to 1917, that is, till the Revolution. And at least on my father's side, my grandfather got to New York, and he and his brother, for one reason or another, decided they wanted to homestead. And at that point, at that time, there were homesteads offerings. And so they, I think, pretty much walked and traveled by the gifts of others to get first to Chicago, where they met the Schwanetsky sisters and married them somehow, almost right away. And my grandfather had his first homestead in South Dakota. And my father was born there, but they failed at that. They moved to another one outside of my hometown of Great Falls in a place called Flowery. They failed at that. And my grandfather became a merchant. He became a junk man, became a fur trader. So eventually he built up that business, which my father and my uncle went into, and others in the family. But that's how we got to Montana on my father's side. It turns out that both of my grandfathers were born in the same town in Russia, Soroki, but they didn't know each other until the marriage. My mother, his family went to Butte, Montana, where they had the mines, and so there was lots of jobs, the copper mines. And my mother's mother, at a very young age, they were living in what was called the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but is Poland now. They couldn't afford for her to have schooling beyond high school. Father was a butcher. And her older brother was already accepted in Vienna Law School. So she was sent out to the family in New York, and they knew a cousin in Montana who had a friend who offered to pay her way. She didn't realize that meant for her to meet and marry him. So she was married by 16, had my mom by 17. In the meantime, the family in Austro-Hungary, Poland, of course, were coming up to the Second World War. And by that time, although she hadn't quite realized it, her older brother had become a Zionist after he finished law school and was involved in the Jewish College Students of Europe associations, where he actually met Einstein and others. And he became a lawyer in Palestine, and just to scoot forward, was the first appointed mayor of Jerusalem in 1947, and then 48 after the revolution, or the War of Revolution, he was elected mayor. And a lot of this we didn't know about, because they had lost track of each other, my grandmother and her brother, because of the war. All the rest of the family, except a couple of brothers in New York, were killed in the Holocaust. And Uncle Daniel Auster, somehow got a hold of my grandmother, and he came out. He was, in 1952, the representative to the UN's Geneva site. I guess it was the old League of Nations. So he came to Montana. But other than that, we had no expectations of higher education. My father took 1 year of college. My mother was a gifted pianist, and so she was a scholarship student at Juilliard, but the Depression was way too much, and so they married and settled down, and he joined my grandfather as a fur trader, a junk man, eventually a steel supply, plumbing supply, hardware, and developed stores all over Montana and Wyoming. So that's the background. Now, I've got to say that in around 1976, I was giving a talk at Harvard College, actually looking at a job there. And Matt Meselson asked me where I was from. And I said, Great Falls, Montana. And he said, let me tell you a story of your family. So Matt Meselson, sometime earlier, I think it was the early to mid-50s, was at a meeting with Selman Waksman, Byron Waksman's father. And Selman asked Matt where he was from. He said, Denver, Colorado. And he said, let me tell you the story about your family. So that's the constant story of Jews who ended up being in the West. Many of them, my grandfather's brother included, they thought they had consumption, and that fit with the idea you should go west. But I think that it was more than just that. So that's that. That's pretty much the family.